actually have you guys sort of take it away. So if if you'd like to introduce yourselves, and then you can just take it away from there.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you all for taking the time. This is an enormous pleasure and a gift to all of us. So thank you. My name is Shannon Watson. I am the founder and executive director of Majority in the Middle, and I am joined by two of my amazing board members, Susan Kent and Sandy Lehman. And we're going to give you a real quick overview of Majority in the Middle and sort of the things that we've been working on. And then we want to spend the majority of the time hearing from you. So Susan and Sandy have a handful of questions to sort of guide the discussion. But I am going to share my screen. Oh, Margaret, it says that it's disabled.
Oh, that's weird. I made you a co-host.
Okay.
I don't know. Let's see. Um, hmm. You might have to send it to me and I might have to share it.
Okay. It's a really large file. It looks like Sandy is the co-host as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I made the wrong person. Okay, hold on.
Okay. There it goes. Okay.
Okay.
Fantastic. All right. Can we see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. All righty. So, Majority in the Middle, we have 3 areas of focus. We're giving those in the middle a place to gather outside the back and forth. We're elevating voices of people who are modeling the behavior that we want to see. And we're working on ways to bring a little more civility and a little less partisanship to our politics. Now, we are simultaneously focusing our work at the state level, and so people who work or who serve in partisan office, the local level with nonpartisan offices, and then everyday voters and citizens across Minnesota. At the moment, we don't do any federally focused work. We're sort of focused on Minnesota. We're headquartered here. So we think of this as sort of our first test case opportunity to try some new things and suggest some reforms. And so our hope is to take what we learn here and then be able to replicate it in other states. And then in addition, the issues having to do with nonpartisan offices, individual citizens, media, things like that, should be applicable anywhere. And obviously, civility and political culture have opportunities for improvement everywhere. Okay, so we are creating both a physical and metaphorical space for those in the middle. We host social events so people can meet and interact with other people who also feel like we can do politics better. All told, this year, we hosted 11 in-person events all over the state. Some of these events were small, just a few people and a legislator or two. But as we learned more, we refined our format and we changed things up to make the events more affordable, a little more accessible, and frankly, less scary for people having to walk into a room not knowing what what they should expect. And now we keep having to reserve a bigger table because more people want a seat, which is fantastic. I did have a goal of visiting all 17 split districts and hosting events in all of those districts this year. We didn't quite make it there, but those other districts will benefit from an even better experience when we get there, hopefully this year. We continued our tradition of hosting Zoom events that were free and available to anyone with a spare hour in the Zoom link. We see our footprint as truly statewide, and virtual events are our best opportunity to showcase ideas in a way that's truly respective of that statewide focus. For the 2 Zoom events we hosted this year, this one starring Susan and Jeremy, and then we had one focused on nonpartisan local government. We had panelists and moderators dialing in everywhere from Eagle Lake to New York Mills to St. Paul to Woodbury to Blue Earth. We also record the Zoom events and post them on our YouTube page so others can watch them later. We just got this one set to the YouTube page, so that is available for viewing, and it is an excellent conversation. Highly recommend that. This year, we also launched a membership program, so people can really be part of what we're doing and have some ownership in it. Memberships start at $25 a year. We are very happy if people can and want to donate more, but we wanted the entry to be as low as possible. And then we also have a free option for students, high school, trade school, college students can become members for free. All right, elevating voices of the people who are modeling the behavior that we want to see. In September, we released our first State of Bipartisanship report, which is arguably our largest and most impactful project to date. We started the project by trying to answer the question that somebody asked me early in session. They said, well, you know, there's that idea that if you're in the minority, you can't even get your bill heard. Is that actually true? And I was like, well, I mean, I've heard of people in the minority, like I know of people in the minority who've gotten bills heard, bills enacted, but like, is a one-off really sort of statistically significant? And we didn't know, and nobody had ever counted, so we decided to count. And we quickly realized that instead of just answering a yes or no question, more nuance and information should really be included in this analysis. So that led us to a different way to evaluate individual bills. So to illustrate this, we created two graphs for each committee you'll see here. The one on the left is showing the bills classified by the party affiliation of the chief author, just red or blue. And then the graph on the right shows the exact same bills, but takes total authorship into account. And as you can see, including shades of purple to represent the proportions of red and blue authors paints a very different picture. And we believe it's a better illustration of the influence and participation by members of each of the political parties, especially since in this era of omnibus bills, the red-blue divide is often more stark when it comes to final votes. And so this sort of purpleness is what we call the hidden bipartisanship. It doesn't get a lot of attention. It doesn't make it on the front page of the paper. It isn't reflected in the vote total of omnibus bills, but it absolutely exists. And we think it's really important to tell this story. So instead of just this, and this graph is all of the bills in the Senate that got hearings this year and their chief authors. So instead of this, the makeup bills getting hearings actually looks like this. I'll go back and forth so you can see. This to this. It's kind of a big difference. Here's an example from House Committee. In this case, instead of 87% of the bills being just the majority, only 56 are actually 100% DFL bills. The other 44% are minority and bipartisan bills. And here's an even starker difference. Where including the purple changes the story. While 100% of the bills getting hearing in Ways and Means this year had a DFL chief author, 17% of those bills had at least one author of each party. We don't talk about that enough. And what does that tell us? To me, that tells us that not all politics is terrible. There is bipartisanship happening. And the stories that constituents hear about everything and everyone being irreparably divided along party lines isn't entirely the case. I mean, obviously there is a lot of partisanship, but it's not everybody. And so in 2024, we're going to publish the report again, and we're also going to make an effort to help media find the stories of hidden bipartisanship during session. Because again, this, which is the House, actually looks like this. Now, there is one sort of ugly truth that we do have to contend with, and that is that not every legislator wants attention for the bipartisan work, and not every legislator would find bipartisanship to be an electoral benefit in their district. Now, we would say that any bipartisanship, no matter how small, every legislator, even those who ran unopposed, have people in their district who didn't vote for them, and representing all of the citizens in the district, not just the ones that voted for them, is their duty. So we made a page for each legislator as well. The graph on the left shows the total authorship of the bills that they carried as chief author. How many other people did they bring into their own bills? And then the graph on the right shows the chief author affiliation of the bills that they signed on to as a co-sponsor. Okay, so that rolls us to our last area of focus, working on ways to bring a little more civility and a little less partisanship to our politics. As you all know better than most, what happens here and in state capitals across the country is largely governed not by laws, but by rules and customs that elected officials make for themselves. And some of those rules and customs can unintentionally serve as a barrier to forming relationships across the aisle. So for instance, in most cases, the offices are separated by party. And when you're physically separated, and the only time you really interact with members of the other party is in committee or on the floor, which are enormously performative spaces, it's harder to form relationships. Sometimes it happens, but not always. Committee seating is another good example. It's kind of hard to see on here, but this is, here's an actual House committee. Parties are sitting on literally opposite sides. And on larger committees like this one, where there are so many members they have to wrap around the inside of the table, you actually have people with their backs to each other's. And if 90% of communication is nonverbal, this is a terrible message to have to be part of, even accidentally or on purpose. And, you know, no wonder this space can feel kind of antagonistic because the seating can make it that way. Now, I should point out, in the House, the seating is not assigned, and there are members who do cross over and sit with the opposite party some of the time. In the Senate, the seating is assigned differently. So I can catch pictures like this, although this was in tax committee, so I had to sneak the picture. This is where we're leaning on the experience of people who've been there, done that, to help find the customs and the rules that can help break down some of the partisanship and start building the relationships. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay, another part of a little less partisanship has to do with the local level. Legally, every local office in Minnesota, city council, county commission, school board, sheriff, park board, hospital district, whatever, those are legally nonpartisan offices. And over the years, that hasn't always been the case as party endorsements and the division and partisanship that comes with those seeps in. So we're looking at ways to keep nonpartisan offices nonpartisan. That's sort of an ongoing body of work. Okay, I am taking quite a bit of time and I really want to get to discussion. So thank you for the opportunity to share. Thank you for your continued leadership and service and participation in this group. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Susan and Sandy to get our discussion started.
Thank you, Shannon. And thanks, everybody. It's good to see you. I'm a proud member of the Minnesota Legislative Society myself, and I'm really excited to be here to talk about majority in the middle. After 10 years in the Senate representing Woodbury, even though for those of you who missed this, I'm hanging out in Lutsen for a few days right now. But when I had known Shannon, I had known the work of Majority in the Middle, and I was really intrigued by the opportunity to take some of my experience as a true citizen legislator from the state capitol and work with others who also really care about this. And when we were working on some of the bipartisan events this summer, I mentioned this organization to Shannon and to Sandy, who now is also a member. And so, you know, that sort of led to some of these conversations with Margaret, because it just seems like this is something that you guys should be aware of. It's a conversation I know a number of us have had in the legislature over the years, and I specifically waved to my friend Dave Baker. He and I worked together with Michelle Denson and Fu Lee on one of the One Minnesota programs a couple years ago for this very reason. And you know, this is just work that needs to not be left on the side of the road. So Sandy, why don't you introduce yourself really quickly, and then we can get diving into the questions.
Sure. Thanks, Susan. Well, I left the legislature in 2020, and I didn't want to leave public policy. I'd been involved and I cared about public policy deeply for many, many years, but I didn't feel like I really had a place any longer in the direction that my party was going with Donald Trump. I'll just throw it out there. And so I had a level of discomfort while I was serving. And then I really had a level of discomfort after the events of 2021. But I felt like I had enough connections and knowledge, and I wanted to share that for a good purpose and to turn my some of my angst into a positive energy. And so when I asked former legislators who I should turn to, they recommended majority in the middle as one possibility. I talked to Shannon, and the next thing I knew, I was involved, and now I'm on the board of directors, and I'm so pleased to be here because it's a place where I can funnel my concern about my state that I love, Minnesota, and our slogan is politics we can be proud of. And I think we'd all like to get there where we're really proud of politics rather than shying away from politics. So when I heard about, and I didn't know about the Legislative Society, I don't know why that wasn't in my field of vision, but I joined as soon as I learned about it because I think there's a natural synergy, obviously, between this group and what we're trying to do, because much of our energy and focus, as you've seen with the report that Shannon just went through, is indeed on the legislature. I think there's a lot of lonely legislators down there like I was, where you feel like if you don't toe the line, you are going to be primaried, you're going to be contested. You know, we really need to be supported to be working for the greater good. And many people like Dave Baker, who I know, is doing that successfully, but it's tough. And you have to be a good communicator and so on. So one of the things we're going to do is try and support those people that truly are working for the greater good and are working in many cases across the aisle. Sometimes, and we can get into this later, sometimes people have asked us, well, are you supporting the third party? Is that the idea of majority in the middle? Not currently. Right now, we're focused on trying to improve the two-party system and doing that by lifting up positive activity, but also making it more comfortable for people to enter the arena. So getting people to feel comfortable to walk into their caucus and not feel like they're in a different country, and people to feel comfortable interacting with their legislators and at the Capitol, so that legislators hear from the average citizen. They're hearing from the activists, but maybe not so much from the average citizen out there who just wants the legislators to do their work. So that's Sandy Lehman, and I'm really pleased to be a part of this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. So with that, it's enough about us. Let's talk about you guys and your thoughts on this issue. So we have a few questions that we brainstormed together, and just to get the conversation rolling, because I do think that State of Bipartisanship report is potentially a really powerful tool to monitor over time and to use opportunities to make things better. In that report, we highlighted several structural processes, some of which Shannon alluded to, that could be potentially expanded to encourage a more productive and civil environment. In that report, they included, as was shown in the presentation, committee seating assignments by seniority, not party. That's the way the Senate does it. Bipartisan bill authorship requirements to get a bill heard in a committee. That was very interesting. That was Senator Rust's policy. There was a little confusion because some people felt like, you know, if you say you have to have multiple bill authors of both parties, that potentially lets a bill be held hostage. She did make the caveat that in the Senate, obviously, where you only have 5 authors, if you have 4 of the same party and you leave one blank in the hopes that somebody from the other party comes on board, you could potentially get that bill heard too. But that was, you know, it was something someone was trying, and we wanted to include that and keep thinking about it. And that reminded me of my own challenges in the legislature, when both parties were in the majority, but particularly obviously when I was in the minority, to require committee chairs to outline requirements to get bills heard and to share those openly, to be clear to everybody about what those are. Because I know some people really want to have a personal conversation, and some people really want to have the official computer system process check, that box check. And what are those requirements, and to make sure that everybody knows what they are, so that everybody feels like they're playing with the same set of rules, and it's not just held between committee chairs and their partisan colleagues. So those are sort of a few ideas that have been thrown around. Wanted to get your reactions to any of those, and then also, you know, based on your experiences, which are so valuable, what are some other specific practices you think we could encourage in the current legislature that would also be helpful? And just to get this started, I think we got two people who aren't currently on, or three people who aren't currently on camera. So either raise your hand or literally, and or you can use, I think we have the raise hand feature available under reactions. It is. And so whatever's best, we'll try to catch everybody and take turns. And let's, just like we do in committee, we'll take a list, keep a list who wants to speak. Todd, good to see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, what a great thing you're doing. I'm very new to what your initiative is. I think I'm a paid up member with the Minnesota Legislative Society. I hope so. I just have a couple of thoughts. One comes from something that Tom Horner said a long time ago, having worked in Dernberger's office, that they're reaching a point where they can't even agree on what the problems are. And I'm wondering whether this initiative might be able to encourage the legislature to have a new kind of mechanism to gather Democrats and Republicans together to identify agreement on what is the problem. And the problems are many and vast, but I thought that might be a possible role for this, I think, terrific initiative. And then just the second piece of input, and I hope I'm not betraying a confidence, but a couple of years ago, I after work, I met with Melissa Hortman, and I said, you know, for people who don't know me, I was in the legislature from 79 to 90. So I go back, I see some familiar faces, which is so cool. But I met with Melissa. I said, you know, what if you had Democrats and Republicans sitting next to each other on the floor of the House? And I thought she was going to roll her eyes and say, Todd, you've been, you know, out of politics too long. But I think I still think that would be a really worthwhile idea. I know you were talking about committee assignments and committee seating and offices, and that's a really good point too. But you know what it's like when you're on the floor of either body. You do get to chat with each other, get to know a little bit about each other's families. So that's my 2 cents. I love what you're doing. I don't view myself necessarily as all that much in the middle, but I do love the concept of people talking to each other. I feel like I was in the good old days when legislators really respected each other no matter what they thought. And I think that needs to be reestablished.
Thank you, Todd. And I think you do raise an interesting point that I think it's worth clarifying here. You know, we do talk about bipartisanship in the middle. It's a little metaphorical. I mean, because ultimately, we all know, even in nonpartisan situations, not everybody's going to agree. It's how we address it, how we talk to each other, how we work through it, how we approach it. And so, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean truly politically middle, but it does mean working together. Terrell.
Hello.
Hi
Welcome.
there.
Thanks for being here. And Todd, it's good to see you. Definitely excited to read the full report. I served until 2010 from the St. Cloud area. Eric Putnam now has my seat in the Senate, my old seat. And I'm a Stearns County Commissioner. We have been working, so two thoughts. One is we've been working very hard on the county front to keep this as nonpartisan as possible, kind of going back to more the idea of you get better ideas too if you're listening to each other. And in a county like ours, you're going to have people all over the place and they don't necessarily align by the way you'd think anyways. One of the practice, we have a policy in place that a number of counties do, and it's becoming harder and harder given who comes to a number of our meetings, is essentially a stay in our lane. We don't do resolutions that aren't on things we can't act on. Like we really only do ceremonial ones. A number of counties have done that. AMC has promoted it. So something to consider, even though people want to come and talk about a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with us, we're trying to get them to come see other people. That's something that's been very helpful and could be something that you all might want to take a look at. And I really appreciate what you said about the bipartisan authors. Again, it's a lot easier when you only have 5 slots, including yourself, to fill up. But for me, almost all my bills had bipartisanship on it. And if somebody couldn't, because even by the time I left, I said when I left because things had already started to change. If it was going to be detrimental for them, it was like, please give input. I mean, former Steve Dill from Dassel brought some bills to me because he didn't think he could be the author. And we actually testified together, which was unusual then. So when people like our mayor, our former senator before me, Dave Kleiss, would bring up unicameral, it's like, nah, that's not getting rid of labels, isn't it? It really is. How can we get more and more people to at least have somebody? Surely out of 35 slots, there could be somebody. And Shannon, I really appreciate what you said about clearly in some districts for some people that might present some problems to them, but encouraging people to reach out. And lastly, going back to what Todd was saying about the floor, I didn't speak much. I went and talked to people. I went and listened, particularly members who were not necessarily the same letters after. So the more of that we can get people to do too, the more helpful it may be.
Great, Cheryl. Thank you. Gail, is your hand up? And then Jane, I see you too.
I'm Becky Kelso.
Oh, sorry.
So, Gail, Rebecca, and somehow Becky's stuck, but the credit card probably has Gail on it. Anyhow, I'm just wondering, and I don't want to get off on a tangent on this, but has your organization given any time to ranked choice voting, which seems like it would fit into your mission well, and I know it's been tried in other states, and I figure if, and I know part of the rap against it is that it's confusing to the voter. I feel like the Minnesota electorate is probably more educated than what the Alaska electorate is, and they seem to have managed it. So I know it's a whole nother big subject, just wondering if you've given any thought to it.
Thank you. That's a great question, Becky. I'm going to let Shannon answer that one because I know she's put more work into that than I have.
Yeah, it's something that comes up, but like a lot of things, so we are a 501c3. So one of the decisions that our board, like, being a C3, we can't engage in electioning. And then the other thing that our board made a decision was that we were going to use Terrell's phrase, stay in our lane. We're not taking positions on any bills or subjects or whatever at the moment. We find it's easier to sort of do our thing and form relationships with 201 people without having to lobby them. So we are at the moment agnostic on the RCV issue, officially.
And okay. Shannon, I would just point you to Terrell's question in chat, wondering about your thoughts too about open primaries like several states have. I assume that follows under the same umbrella. Same
thing. I will say every in-person event that we had this year, somebody brought up primaries, open primaries, caucuses, all of those things. So it's obviously things that people are interested in, but we haven't taken position on them.
It is worth pointing out that this is a very new organization too, that was founded in the middle of the pandemic. And so this has been a building exercise, and this really was a big sort of light change year. Did I say that right? For majority in the middle. Okay, Jane, and then Rick.
Excuse me, I'm Jane Krentz. I served in the Minnesota Senate from 93 to 2002. And starting in 2001, I also part-time served as senior policy advisor for the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. So for 20 years, I worked with legislators across state lines and party lines. And it still tended to be more Democrats than Republicans, but what we found is if you can find a Republican and find an area that we could agree on and get them into the group and build relationships and build trust, they were more open to hearing other ideas. And they brought, I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense to have everybody who agrees exactly with everything at the table talking about things, because it's too insular. It's better if someone, well, have you thought about this? Well, what about that perspective? Or in my community, this is what's going on. It makes a much richer discussion. So I love the idea of your organization, and I, as a volunteer, I serve as the chair of the Minnesota Senate Reunion Committee, and I keep in touch with legislators in both parties. Anytime there's somebody who passes, unfortunately, I send an email to everybody. We plan Senate reunions. We're very bipartisan in that group. And again, you build those relationships, you build the trust, and it just leaves the door open for other possibilities. So I enthusiastically support what you're doing.
Thank you, Jane. That's a great idea. And it would be fun to have a conversation to think about what we as an organization could do to, coach members in those practices. So very good. Rick.
Yeah, a few different thoughts real quickly here. One of them is, if you haven't read Dave Bishop's book, Finding Common Ground, and Dave Bishop was a legislator who was kind of a caucus of one in many cases. Turns out that we came in the same year, 1983, and we went to the orientation session. And the one thing I came away from that orientation session is the one person I absolutely did not want to be sitting anywhere near was Dave Bishop. And as it turns out, with the drawing of the floor seats and stuff, we were about the last two that drew. And I ended up Dave Bishop sitting right next to me, and it ended up being a wonderful learning experience for me in many respects. As everybody knows, you share your materials and books, and at that time, we were allowed to be able to voting. People were voting for your neighbors and all that kind of stuff. But Dave Bishop's book really talks about, and he served most of his tenure in the minority, and he talks about how to be an effective member in the minority. And give you an idea, when Bob Vanasek, who I think might be, he was signed up for the call, I don't know if he's on it or not, but when he was speaker, the person he would allow the chairs of committees to ask who they wanted to be on their conference committee. The most requested member when Vanasek was speaker as a Democrat was Dave Bishop, a Republican. So, I mean, Dave does have a track record of success here in terms of how to work both sides of the aisle and everything else. So I would recommend reading Finding Common Ground if you haven't read it already. It's an outstanding book on how as a minority member be successful. A couple other thoughts, and just real quickly. One is, I was, especially after I spent more time in the legislature, I was there for 12 years, wasn't as concerned about things like, was I passing a single piece of legislation? I think most of my legislation ended up being in omnibus bills. So gets a little bit more, it gets more difficult to kind of track what you're talking about in terms of, the legislation. Plus, I think we all know that all legislation is not equal. There's a big difference between, a bill that changes the property ownership up in a state park from public to private or vice versa, to some, omnibus tax bill or something like that. There's a huge difference in terms of the quality of what we're talking about here. So just counting, I'm not sure how valuable that is personally. It doesn't strike me as I say that with the risk that it sounded like some people really thought that was, an impressive measure. I'm not convinced it is. And then the other thing that I would, and I know I'm kind of monologuing it, but a lot of thoughts on this topic through the years. The other thing that I noticed is that a lot of times, even in terms of who gets the media attention, are basically the hand grenade lobbers in the legislature and not the consensus builder. And one example I like to use in that regard, for those who remember Dennis Osment on the House side and on the Republican side, and Dallas Sams on the Senate Democratic side. When the government went into shutdown in somewhere around the 90s, I don't know the exact year, but few people were even aware that the one finance division that didn't happen to was those two people, and they got virtually zero credit for it. I mean, I don't know how to correct that, but it seems like if we're rewarding and giving credit to the people who are causing the most problems on the floor and, in the media and stuff, and that's who's getting the attention. That's a separate issue, but I'm telling you, it ties into this. We're not giving recognition to the people who are doing the right thing from my standpoint. So sorry for the monologue, but I love this topic. I love what you're trying to do. And I'm more than willing to try to help if I can. So.
Thank you, Rick. And Bob, I see your hand. I just want to respond to a couple of things there. Shannon may want to, but if you get a chance to read some of the text of the report, the bulk of it is the charts. But the text of it talks a lot about what it is we're trying to do and why. And we acknowledge that this question of bill authorship is a very narrow measure, but as we all understand, if you don't measure it, you can't do anything about it, right? And one thought is that even as we've done this, and we didn't tell anybody we were going to do this. This was just done, over the course of the session and then compiled and released right after Labor Day. Now that that's out there, is that going to change any behavior? Just the fact that, somebody's out there counting and paying attention, is that going to impact behavior? And it'll be interesting to watch that. I saw where, let's see, what was I going to look at? There was a thing. Oh, from Jane's comment in chat. It would be interesting to see if an analysis of bills under split control sessions as opposed to trifecta sessions would affect that. Having lived through that in very critical ways, I would say probably yes, but that's the thing. Once we start doing this over time, we'll be able to evaluate those things and see the contexts of them. And the other thing I wanted to say to your comment, Rick, and we talk about this quite a bit and would absolutely welcome more input on it, this notion of what the media reports so significantly. First of all, I think those of us who've been in the legislature know that the coverage of the legislature isn't exactly comprehensive in the mainstream media. And my first session was in 2013, the other trifecta session, and I spent all my time working on education and transportation, and the media only wanted to ask me about same-sex marriage. And obviously that was a significant bit of legislation and a significant law that passed in our state. But it was not by any stretch of the imagination the bulk of what was happening, but it sure did seem to be the bulk of what got covered. And that was a very eye-opening moment for me as a legislator. And so the point about who gets attention, what gets attention, that's part of the aim of what we're doing here, is how can we create other incentives beyond the current media situation to reward people for working together, for putting public service ahead of clicks or fundraising or whatever it is that they're going after. And so that's sort of embedded in a lot of what we're doing. But again, you guys have been in that seat, and yes, things have changed over time somewhat, but it is that's a big part of what we're trying to investigate and welcoming insight from folks like yourselves. Mr. Bob Tennyson, good to see you.
Thank you. I have a question and a suggestion. The question is, do legislators actually know each other these days, even in their own caucus? How closely are they to each other? Do they talk to each other? Do they have friendships? My impression is, from being on the outside, that that's probably not happening, and certainly not as bipartisan as it should be. And to Todd Otis and John Salter and I overlapped in our service. I go back 71 to 83. And I had a pretty good record of getting things passed. But I spent a lot of time from when I was a freshman in a minority just talking to everybody else and finding out who they were. And a lot of these were much older than I was. I was a young guy at that time. And formed those kind of friendships. And I found that when I had bills that were controversial, and some of them were, they were almost never partisan. In fact, I can't think of one that was partisan. And partly because of the relationships we established. But if that's not happening, you can have all this procedures and all the stuff you want. But people have to take their own individual responsibility to meet their colleagues. And if they don't do that, I don't know what you do about it. But and also, let me go on to comment about chairmanships. I chaired the Senate Commerce Committee for 6 years, and I chaired a bunch of subcommittees as well over the years. And one of the things that you do as a chair, and I don't know that you can set particular criteria for a hearing. There are some bills that I thought so obnoxious, I wouldn't give a hearing no matter what. And because they would just be destructive and they'd be divisive of the committee. And other times I'd hear any bill that was worthwhile hearing. And in my committee for 6 years, I don't think I ever lost a vote because I gave everybody options to participate. And I had a terrific committee with really strong legislators. But I just found that by providing committees with information and issues and options, and we didn't have an array of staff at that time, we did that ourselves to a large extent. But I think the question I have is, do people really know each other these days? And if they aren't, how are you going to solve that?
That's a really good question. And I think it varies a lot. But yeah, one of the things we've talked about quite a bit is it's like people sitting next to each other. I remember because of the seniority seating, and I was vice chair of transportation, I got to sit next to David Senjum for 4 years, and it was an absolute delight and an incredible opportunity to get to know somebody who is a special part of the Minnesota Senate. And I wish everybody could have those kinds of opportunities. So yeah, those are exactly the kinds of ideas that we're floating about. So I know we started off with a big conversation initially, and so we do have other questions that we do want to dive into. So I'm sure we'll be touching on more of these as we keep going. So let me turn this over to Sandy for the next question.
Well, actually, John's or Robert's question leads right into the question, leads right into my question. But first, I just wanted to circle back to Rick Kruger. When I was a new legislator, Dave Bishop came to the Capitol. He had just released his book, and he was providing legislators with autographed copies of his book. And so, yes, I have read Finding Common Ground. And it's really a good book for how to be successful in the minority. And it's all about building relationships. So the transition here to my question is exactly this, and I hope maybe we have some additional suggestions. But thinking back on your experience about building relationships, what suggestions would you have for newer members coming into the legislature? And, are there specific, besides seating arrangements, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are about that, but are there other events or activities that you think might be helpful today for people to build those relationships that are so important?
Are you asking me?
You can start.
Oh, no. Just visiting individually on the floor or whatever to introduce yourselves to each other, to establish a relationship, so find out what you have in common, and go from there. You find out what their interests are. You also find out who you think knows what they're talking about and who doesn't, and make your judgments accordingly. But I think, and I did that on both houses. I'd go over to the house and do the same thing. You get to know people. So it takes a lot of effort, but it pays off because you get some consensus.
Thank you. Other ideas, John?
Hi, I'm John Salshert. I served from 67 to 75. Bob and I overlapped. And I guess I have a few things. Things were so different then. Our offices were actually in the chamber the first session we served.
Oh.
We had no offices except for committee chairman. And if you wanted to dictate a letter, you called down to the steno pool. Somebody came up and took the letter from you, and our file system was underneath our desk. But the big advantage was that I knew everybody in that chamber because everybody was there before the session started. You were free to walk around. You got to talk to people and to get to know them better. Just as a sidelight, one of the people that came in with me was John Winter in the first session, and I got to know him so well. We were friends for 50 years or more, and we just died this last year. But we were the closest of friends, and he was another political party, and he was who he was, and I was who I was, but we just were good friends. We vacationed together and everything. I knew one thing when I came there, and that was you needed to have the other party on your bill if you wanted to get something passed. And so we did that. I would like to comment also in my term, Martin Sable had a legislators retreat. And it was on a weekend. I don't know how long it lasted or whatever, when in the session, but it was early when he was speaker. And out of that came a lot of really good things, and people began to talk even a little more. And as a matter of fact, when I was committee chairman, I appointed a member of the other party as the vice chair of the committee. And we got along well, and we got a lot of good legislation passed, and it really helped. And that was one of the things that kind of came out of that retreat. The other thing is, my wife and I watch a lot of TV, although we're watching less and less lately because it makes us so uncomfortable. However, one of the things that she keeps telling me is that, we used to know the other legislators and their wives and husbands, and we knew how many children they have and what was going on in their families because we had dinners. And I know now under the law, you can't give anybody a cup of coffee, but fundamentally, we had these dinners and they were really nonpartisan. Everybody went, brought your spouse, and you got to talk, and you were seated at tables with people of the other party, and you just got to know people. And my wife says, they just got to know each other better, because the one thing that comes out of that is trust. If I know someone really well, I can trust them. And that was really important. Actually, while I was serving, when it hadn't started yet, we never got a printed copy of a conference committee report. You had to trust the person who was reporting that everything in there was in there, and what shouldn't be in there wasn't. And that's the kind of trust level we had between individuals. So that's the one thing. And now what I see, that there's absolutely no trust at all. And with that, I'll just tell you, I think that this is the greatest idea I've heard of in years, and keep it up. Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, John. When I was in the legislature, that was a great legend that we heard about your era, where your desk was your office. We just couldn't even fathom that. So thank you for bringing us back to memory lane. First, I see Dave Baker has his hand up, and then Roz Peterson. So Dave,
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, and again, my first time kind of listening in on this, and I think most of you, if you've known me recently here, again, Susan, Roz, it's so good to see you guys, Sandy. If you've seen me work, I really get the middle here pretty well. I think that some of my proudest moments are these bipartisan bills that we passed with opioids and recently, and I will tell you, the graphing is important. It's interesting to me to see how that looks. And again, my foundation is this: I'm there to get things done and find solutions to these problems. And so much has changed in the last 1 year. As a guy who went down there for proud of this stuff, it is different. I found myself this year, I'm kind of just telling you where it is today because I think I'm the only one that's actively in the elections that is sitting here today. I could be wrong. It is so different, and I think that I'm angry and I'm frustrated. And again, maybe it's 6 years of fatigue or 5 years of fatigue in the minority. And what I wanted to do was listen to how can I get my juice back with this group today, and this is very helpful. So I want to tell you all that it's helpful, but it starts with the leadership. It starts with the highest level to know that there's going to come a day. And that day will turn when elections are different. And when that happens, it's these knee-jerk reactions now that we've got this pent-up frustration because we didn't feel heard in such an enormous way, especially when you have a trifecta on either side, probably. But this year, as you all know, this was an enormously transformational year, and there's no other way of putting it. But I think that I think it was to Bob's question. The one bill that I'm most happy I ever passed was 2019 when I passed the opioid bill, first in the nation, got the pharmaceutical companies here, and Liz Olson and I worked so hand in hand on this thing, and now I'm devastated that she's leaving. And again, I get it. And I if you haven't seen it, I said some really nice things about her in the Duluth Tribune, because she is a terrific legislator who I can trust. And I don't have that there because the people that are there, maybe on both sides, they're different. They are different thinking kind of people. They are just, it is how it is. I don't know how we get there. And I think part of me wanting to be here is help me understand what it is that is truly missing. And I think that somehow the strongest voices in here, in this group, has to be going to our speaker, our majority leader, and the governor, because that is what really triggers a lot of this. And I think the reason that Liz and I and Julie Rosen and Chris Eaton back in the day when we wrote that bill, we had to compromise. And we did it really, really well. And we had to give up things we didn't want to do. But that obviously it didn't happen right now. So we don't go out for social events anymore because we don't want to participate because, again, comments last year that I get sometimes to work on, again, the driver's license for all bill that I was one of the few Republicans that supported. And they didn't want to hear some of the things that we had worked on before because, Dave, we don't need your voice anymore. We don't need your vote. Sorry, we just don't need it. And when you hear things like that from the majority, you lose a lot of faith quickly in some of those processes. But I'm here to listen and understand this. I want to do better. I know I'm part of the solutions, and I need to be part of fixing this mess that we have right now in Minnesota. So I'm really just here to listen, but we do need to go back to our pre-COVID orientation sessions with all members, especially when the freshmen would put on the party. That hasn't happened for 3-4 years now. And there's a lot of value to that. So I hope that we can get back to some of those things. Again, Susan and I, we worked on the One Minnesota aspects before. I don't want to even go this year, to be honest with you, Susan, and I don't want to be that guy. I just don't, because I don't feel heard ever. I don't have that drive, and so I don't want to be that guy and then those guys, the folks that didn't go before. So I'm here to listen and to say, what can I do better as well without complaining? But how can I be a part of fixing this thing we have in Minnesota that was never like this before I've seen this? So thank you for letting me throw up on you guys. So that's what it is. And I appreciate you allowing me to share. Thank you.
Dave, I'm so happy you're here because you truly are the role model for bipartisanship in the legislature, and we don't want to see you leave because you're angry. So we hope that you stay there. I just feel bad. I saw Liz leaving. Can I ask you a question, Dave? Would you say that many of the new members in the legislature today are more activists than we've had in the past?
100% true.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, if I can, to what Dave was talking about, and I will say, Dave, I have brought up to Shannon, and I would love to have you be a part of this, when we did that One Minnesota thing, that was right before the COVID session. And so everything just kind of has gone sideways since then. And all that great work we did that I think everybody walked away from felt like we made a really great start. And I know there's been some change at the Humphrey School since we did that work with them, but I think it would be great if you and we could get Michelle and potentially Fu back into this with Larry Jacobs and see if we could, and that might be something that the Majority in the Middle organization could help, get some momentum going and see if we can't pick up from what we started at that point. And the other thing I wanted to say to the whole group, when Margaret sent out the latest email about this, I think it included a link to a Star Tribune opinion piece that Shannon had done a little over a month ago. And it really gets at this dynamic about exactly what you were talking about, Dave. There are some of us who are there who are to get things done. And there are some of us who are there because we have an agenda, and it's an important agenda, and nobody's demeaning that. It's just a different attitude and how those people can best work together. And I really recommend, and Shannon and Margaret, maybe we can get that resent, just as a reminder, because I think it's a really good thought piece to sort of approach this. So just wanted to chime in with those two responses to Dave's very important comments.
All right. Did you have something, Shannon, you were going to say? No.
I love Dave Baker.
Oh, okay.
Of anybody this year who I watched really try to make it better, it was Dave. And some of those committees were really hard to sit through. So more power to you, man.
So yay, Dave. Okay, Roz, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Representative Baker, for your comments. I was excited to hear that you were willing to chime in because, yeah, you're living it right now. But the part I wanted to add is what can we do? And Minnesota Legislative Society, this is where we really do like to shine because we're bicameral, we're bipartisan, and we like to have some fun. And it is about fostering those relationships so that you can build trust, just like all of you guys have already discussed. And that's why, keep your eye posted for what we're going to be doing this year. I know that Burger Mo's is going to be in one of those things. So, and encourage your other colleagues to join, I guess, because you're right. The legislature is constantly changing. Different people are coming in all the time. It's a moving target, but that's where we have to keep on building those relationships and hopefully have a little fun at the same time. And thanks for everybody for being here and all these comments. It's great.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands up. So, I do see a hand up, Todd. Go. Oh, your microphone is off.
Just a quick couple of things. Possible way of overcoming some of this is reactivating interim work. I don't know how much that goes on now, but I know that it was very important even before I got in the legislature, where people would have interims to look at issues, work through them. And it kind of goes back to my first suggestion that you get Republicans and Democrats to sit down, not in front of a bill, not in session, talking about what's the problem that we agree on trying to attack. And then you're going to get good ideas from both sides. And I really feel like if there could be a stepping back and then a stepping together without the glare of publicity in a committee or on the floor, talking about why don't we try this? One of my favorite quotes was from Hottinger. He said he had a great bill when he was in the Senate, and it had 9 amendments from both parties, and it got better every time. And if there was a way we could create an opportunity for members to get away from the legislature, away from the committees, talking about issues they really care about and brainstorming together, I think that's got to help somehow. So that's my 2 cents. Sorry for talking twice.
Oh, I am, and thank you, Todd, for that. I hear you, and I can envision that. When legislators get down to the Capitol and start the session, oftentimes you'll hear them say, well, this is what I've been hearing at the doors, or this is what I've been hearing. But it's a partisan lens, right? and wouldn't it be great if you knew that you were going to be talking about legalizing marijuana? Wouldn't it be great if you could get an interim session where people sat down together and said, "This is going to happen. Let's try and create the best bill we can create." So thank you for that. Did I see a couple of other hands? Yes, Rick. Oh, your microphone is off. Rick, we can't hear you.
I had eye surgery recently. I could barely read where the where the unmute was. Sorry about that. Listening to a few of the folks who were talking, and Tennyson and Selchert and Dave and stuff. One of the things that I think was an unintended consequence of some of the ethics reforms, the last big wave, was we cut off opportunities for the social interactions on a very broad scale. I think that was unintended, but I do think it happened. Roz reminded me when she was talking that this is an organization that could help cure some of those types of activities. We could do things more socially. We should be. You talked about the murder moles thing. You need an opportunity. I mean, I can remember Chuck Brown describing me once that the legislature was operating at that time when he was there, like it was like pro wrestling, where the wrestlers would all they'd all get in the same car, go together, battle it out at some event, and then get together afterwards for some socializing. And I don't think there's a socialization side as frequent as it was. Maybe it was too much back then, but it was almost every night in the legislature there were things going on that involved legislators seeing each other and interacting socially on a wide scale with people from all parts of the state. And I don't think that's going on now either. So maybe this organization could help with that.
Okay, Jane, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I wanted to get back a little bit to ways to improve things. When I chaired the Environment Committee in the Senate, and Dennis Osmond, who was referenced, chaired it in the House, we intentionally coordinated between my staff and his staff. So if we were having a bill hearing and somebody was driving in from rural Minnesota, rather than make them come once to the Senate and once to the House, we would do it on the same day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, or sometimes we would do joint committee meetings together. So people would make it more accessible to the community. And it also isn't always Democratic Republican differences. It's a lot rural metro differences. And it's also leadership and what they will allow. And Kathy's on the call here. Dennis allowed Kathy and I to create a children's environmental health working group, because we weren't allowed to have a committee, but we had a working group. And in a bipartisan way, we heard all sorts of ideas and possible legislation. And eventually we ended up sending a lot of them through the health committee because they wouldn't get anywhere at that point in the environment budget committee or whatever. So anyway, you kind of do some workarounds, but it's based on relationships. And Dennis and I became very good friends. We worked together in the NCEL. We both traveled together to work out with legislators on both parties as a team. And that has continued for many years with different people. So those relationships are helpful. And getting back to the Senate Reunion Committee, when we had the reunion in September, very few of the current legislators came. It was mostly more senior members who reminisced about how wonderful it was to be able to work with people on the other party, but the currents weren't there to hear about it in enough numbers. And we talked about during the next session, just maybe we can promote what your group does or what MLS does or something to suggest people just show up, and you don't have to register in advance and buy tickets and get accurate counts and do all that work. Just show up on your own dime and buy a burger or buy a glass of wine or buy a Coke or whatever, and just learn to meet people and hear from them. So that's all.
Thank you, Jane. I think we have the budding of a good relationship here, because I think maybe we can help each other, help you get current legislators involved, and we will all benefit from that. Terrell Clark, I think you have your hand up.
Thanks again. So I do think, Dave, what you're talking about, you're being intentional, and it does require members to be intentional. So thank you for that. Please do not go away. As another Central Minnesotan, I really appreciate what you do. So Rick, I know I've said this to you before, that law changed decades ago, at this point. And we're one of the few legislators that actually everybody gets per diem. So if we can remind people they don't need lobbyists, because that's who used to pay for all those, to pay for something, maybe they do have resources that they get to do that. And I do love the idea. We've tried it a few times. Let's keep trying it. And maybe we do it together where we are giving people those opportunities to come out and socialize, be able to spend some time, develop those relationships. And while it might not seem like there's a distinction here, we can get sponsorships for some of those events, which can help pay for it as well. So let's keep finding ways to engage people. We all can keep trying to get current members to do that. And so, Dave, if there's something that all of us could do to be more helpful, let us know.
I wanted to jump in.
Oh, good. Sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Shannon. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like a logistical thing, because we don't lobby, we are not a lobbyist principal. And so thus the, technically the gift ban doesn't apply to us, which is a dumb loophole in the law, but I will exploit that loophole as it relates to this group.
Too. My question might have been, again, there were attempts with the civility caucus, and I don't understand sometimes what is the difference there. I've attended a few of those. They get changed a lot during session with our current members because of scheduling, and the fluid nature of the session is hard. And so those are areas and attempts that I like folks trying to do that. Again, I think part of this is maybe a group like, the majority in the middle or the civility folks, if you can get our leaders to these meetings and try to have some sort of roundtable open discussion about, Melissa, why is it that members are saying things like this? Or why are chairs doing this and that? It's hard to get that attention in this extreme environment. And again, my district is much different than folks that are in the metro. I understand that. I expect a lot of differences, but I don't when I have one governor who represents everybody who has supposed to try to have that balancing thing. I think that's what the founders had always thought of, is that we've got some balancing, and that, maybe what we didn't see is that. So my fear is that the reason there's so few current members that want to get engaged is because right now we are just so, and even the majority isn't here either, but I feel like we're just so divided that and we've got to figure out a way to do this. So I'm hoping that your voice is louder and clearer with leaders of both caucuses and the governor's office, and to say, do you see what you're doing here? From your look at a different perspective. As former members, do you know what's going on here? Do you see what this is? And maybe it is just a cram it down and go and see what cleans up. But I don't know if your historical perspective can help them in helping all of us listen better to all of us. And so I don't know what that role is, but that's, again, why I'm here listening to some super smart people today.
Me too.
Thank you, Dave. And I will say, as a Republican here, it's especially hard to get Republicans involved because the trust level isn't there. And so I especially appreciate your participation, Roz's participation, as two Republicans that I recognized, because I was on the Civility Caucus as well, and it was really tough. People would latch onto me as kind of the lone Republican oftentimes at some of these sessions. But I agree with you on the leadership. Boy, I mean, the leaders rule the day. Individual legislators have a huge role to play, but by and large, leaders set the tone, the culture, and so on. So thank you for that. With that, I don't think I see any other hands, and I don't know what our time limit is here, but whoops, I see Gail. I'm sorry, Gail.
It's Becky Kelso.
Betty. Okay, your name says Gail on there.
My confusion, my source of confusion. Folks, are there no swing districts in this state anymore? I mean, but I was a Democrat in a Republican district. I would have posted on my campaign literature that I was a member of the majority in the middle. And my opponents would post that how many times I voted with Democrats. In other words, those districts have to still exist where promoting yourself as a bipartisan, everything you believe in person still could get you votes. Are they gone?
Well, a lot of them have gone. A lot of the districts are more polarized on a partisan basis than they used to be. And if you look at my district, when I was elected in 2012, it was truly one of the swingiest districts that there is. And, you know, the folks who got elected this last cycle, you know, in the House and the Senate, it was by 15, 20 point margins. It is just really changed, reflecting a lot of the national trend. So it's different than it used to be. And there are fewer of the truly up for grabs districts than we used to have.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, Susan, would you like to move to the next question?
Sandy, I was going to say, I think your next question, because we've covered a lot of this ground. I think if you go to the Legislative Advisory Commission, why don't you talk about that one?
Okay, thank you. I'm anxious to talk about this one.
I know, it's a good one.
We're a relatively new organization, and when we first launched, we formed a bunch of committees, probably too early, and then realized, no, we need to step back a little bit and get our structure in place. And so we have a small board of 9. We have just added 6 that are starting in now the first of the year, so we're going to have 15 board members. We do not have current elected partisan members on the board because we really want to maintain our nonpartisan image. But we do have former legislators like Susan and myself. We have Keith Franke on the board. But we need to make that connection with legislators. That's why we're here talking to you today. So we are forming about 3 committees right now that are going to help us do our work because we become more active and we can only do so much as a board. One of those committees we're talking about is a Legislative Advisory Committee. And we're just wondering, we'd love to hear feedback from you on what are some of the projects such a committee could work on, and could this group be helpful in maybe advocating for specific ideas, or what feedback or recommendations would you give to us before we move ahead? Legislative Advisory Committee.
You know, let me just jump in real quick here, and I will tell you one area that the University of Minnesota did about 3-4 just before COVID was they invited bipartisan folks to get together one-on-one for lunch, and they were going to buy the lunch. So Peter Fisher and I got together, had lunch. They bought it. It was just the 2 of us. We got to know each other. And that invitation has created a great relationship with Peter and I today. We work on a lot of things together. And they were able to sort of connect us because we had hospitality in our backgrounds. And so there was, I don't know how it worked. I don't know who did it. I don't know if they're still doing it. There is a way that folks in the background could try to connect a few of us 2-on-2, 1-on-1. I think those are some of the things that can help a lot. Don't know where the budget comes from, but I like that idea, Sandy, about getting, you know, more of this conversation out there. But it starts with each member and how we can start, you know, getting new relationships with, even if in a session period, if it's 3 or 4 new connections in a bipartisan way, somebody on the other side of the aisle. I think that really helped us a lot because that was one thing that I found was very helpful with whoever led that deal. So, but I like your idea here.
Yeah. Okay.
That was Professor Pearson's project. She and I have had a chat about that.
Okay, that was great.
Okay. So thank you, Dave. So do you think that that majority in the middle, having a legislative advisory committee, having a structured legislative advisory committee would be useful? And if so, I mean, as a committee, what do you think they could do? What kind of ideas would they?
And maybe while you think about that, I'll provide some history. So when we put together the committees, we had a communications committee and a fundraising committee and local elected officials committee, which was, you know, local nonpartisan offices. And then we had this legislative advisory committee, and each of the committees had like a 2-paragraph charter. except for the Legislative Advisory Committee. They got all wound up with how many members and how many people are going to vote. You have to have 3 from over here and 3 from over here and 3 from over, all the things, and got so far down the thing about making it fair and seeing who's going to be. I mean, it was another illustration about the total lack of trust. That committee never really got off the ground, and then the people who were trying to help didn't. And part of Sandy's questions, I think, could be, is that something that we need to do, or do we just lean on this group and not have another formal committee? That kind of thing.
Well, again, my opinion, because I'm the only current sitting member, I would say that you've got to get more of me to these meetings to find out what it is that they want to. So before you get too spread out with more committees, we're already overwhelmed with meetings and Zooms and things like that. So I think that those are real time crunches in realities today. But if we can get a solid more handful, if we can get both executive committees or the majority boards and the minority boards, and if we can starting together to have dinner for those leaders, that group or something. But again, you've got to have the leaders wanting to do this, to be willing to take the time. So I don't know, but we've got to get more of me here and to try to get there. And again, I'm not sure if this was just a bad day or nobody could make it, but I want to understand the difference between majority in the middle and civility caucus. What is it? Because I don't understand it yet. Can anybody tell me that?
Well, I think I'll take a stab. I'm not sure, how the civility caucus started. I was a member of it. It was supported by the administration, and they started out with lunches and getting people together, and just to have lunch. That was often a challenge because everybody is so busy. Your schedule changes. You commit. You think you're going to go. You don't have time. Different conversations. We brought in a Braver Angels group and did some workshops, and tried that out for a little bit. But it was all things that we attempted during the legislative session with legislators.
Or this is more year round. This is more ongoing.
Yeah, this is year round. And I think, Dave, the thing that I like about the Legislative Society and majority in the middle is we are not part of the administration. We don't have any partisan connection at all. We're a nonprofit. We don't have to abide by any sort of the public laws that are out there. So I think it's just helpful. People would hopefully trust a group that's an outside group more than, I think there was even a level of mistrust just because it was administration, staffed. So.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say, David, that is an important distinction with majority in the middle is we are also very public focused. We're trying to get the word out to the public and help them understand this issue and help them feel like there's an opportunity to be a part of a politics that is not as toxic as what they tend to hear about on the news. And so it is a bigger, the legislative focus is one part of what we do, but it is broader than that. It also includes local elected.
And one more thing that I was maybe going to mention, because I don't want to take over, but when you are recognized as doing work in the middle, that goes a long way for those that are doing that. There are people that are in those swing districts. Yes, they do exist. There are less of them, but there are still out there. I still consider myself in a swing district, and even though I've won by large amounts, it's because I'm really fighting for the middle there. And I think that's what people see. But I think that if we get recognized as some of us members, when you work on that bipartisan bill, like the opioid bill, we sure felt good about it. We didn't get a lot of action afterwards, but if there was a group at the end of a session like you to kind of give up the best of the best, and it's different from lobbyists, it's different from getting it from the unions and the things like that, to give it a Legislator of the Year award. If you found people that did the best bipartisan work, recognize them. And this is the group to do that. And I think that would go a long way to give you clout, to credibility, talk about that, and maybe try to put a bigger push out there for the winners that are doing what you want us to do. Recognize who they are and show them off, because that, to me, is the best of Minnesota politics.
yeah, that is definitely something we've been talking about. But that requires, you know, something like the bipartisanship report.
Right.
And this goes back to, you know, something Rick said early on, which is our entire system right now, whether it's social media, traditional media, the folks in your local Senate district committees and organizations, and who show up at your caucuses and your primaries, they all are looking for some sort of, you know, hand grenade lobbers, you know, the folks that are getting the attention, who are feeding the red meat, or however we want to phrase it. And you know, too many people who wish they could have a place in our political system and in these conversations just don't feel comfortable or welcome there. And you know, that's what we're trying to do, is to as a group reach out. Sandy and I talk about this, you know, that when she's doing things in greater Minnesota, you know, she's going into these communities and saying, yep, these are decent people. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're not trying to trick you on anything, you know, that we have to be able to sort of vouch for each other and the work we're doing, because people are so skeptical right now about our whole political process. And we just have to figure out how to heal that. And I heard the word trust a lot.
I thank you for that. I got to run because I got somebody waiting for me on a call too. Thank you. It's good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate your
Thanks,
time
Dave.
today. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you.
Dave,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
See ya.
Bye-bye. Okay, so where are we on time here, Margaret?
Wrapping up, I think.
Okay. Do you want to have some wrap-up comments, Shannon, or?
I would just say thank you. This has been enormously helpful. Obviously, I've been scribbling notes the entire time. And your perspective is what we lean on. And I lean on Sandy and Susan a lot, because I have been around the Capitol for many years. I have never in my life held an election certificate. So my experience is different. And so knowing, you know, what it's like for the people with boots on the ground is super helpful. I would say if you think of other ideas or thoughts later today, or, you know, in the week, I put my email in the chat. I'm sure Sandy or Susan would be interested in talking more if you could think of things. If you go to our website, which is majoritymiddle.com, you can sign up for our email updates if you would like to get those and hear, you know, what we're doing.
Yep. Get to know us and get involved and spread the word in your communities. You know a lot of folks who probably would really be interested in knowing about this work and a way to be involved. So please feel free to share our website and information and join.
And I do want to put in one more plug. Rick, I'll go to you after. One more plug. We're doing a really fun event on Saturday, February 3rd. It is what we call Silly Questions Saturday. And it was inspired by the number of people who I've seen at the Capitol just be lost. Either they don't understand the process or they don't understand the building. So we got room 316 for a couple of hours on a Saturday, and we're inviting everybody to come in and ask their silly questions and learn from people who've been around. So if you're interested in that, that is a free event on Saturday, February 3rd, and more information is on our website, and we're really excited about it. Okay, and then
Well,
Rick
I just want to say I want to thank all of you for being here today and sharing us more about what you're doing, the work that you're doing. We will definitely add it as a little highlight in our newsletter that we send out periodically, and try to raise more awareness with other members as well.
I'll make one kind of closing comment. It's a little bit funny. This morning I got a call from David Schultz, the college professor at Hamlin and the UM. And he was talking to me about Gene Pawlowski, who announced last night that he's not running for re-election. And he was talking about what needs to be done and stuff like that. And I told him that, you know, Pawlowski isn't one that I think runs towards the middle and stuff. And his response to me was, Kruger, you're such a dinosaur. They don't campaign like that anymore. So hello dinosaurs.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been awesome. This has exceeded our expectations. So I appreciate that.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thanks,
Okay,
Russ.
bye-bye.
Thanks, Margaret.
Bye-bye.